Welcome back. In order to start off with Chapter 2, I want to go ahead and tell you that the way that the future videos will be set up is that it'll be part lecture and part live coding. Of course, being a recorded video is not live, but you'll be able to see what I am setting up and doing, and you can follow along. But I want to go ahead and explain things first before we jump into the actual code. For Chapter 2, since it has quite a lot of stuff to cover, I'll be breaking up the videos in various sections so that the videos aren't too long and you can go back and reference something if you need it. First things first, let's talk about setting up and planning websites. Of course, this is a coding class, so we're not going to be using WYSIWYG editors or what you see is what you get. Essentially, we're not using drag and drop editors. We are not having a visual graphic interface where you can drag and drop a box or a text box or anything else. We are not doing that. We are doing live coding. There are plenty of free editors to choose from, such as Notepad if you are familiar with the Windows system. Notepad++, I highly recommend. Brackets, which we are using. Visual Studio Code, Atom, Bluefish, HTMLKit, and LaTeX. There are a gazillion more out there. These are just the top ones that either I've heard of and or use. There are plenty of paid editors out there, such as Sublime, BBEdit, UltraEdit, and XEdit. You do not need to pay for an editor for this class. Let me repeat, you do not need to pay for an editor. That is completely up to you if you want to, but it is not required for this class. Again, we are using brackets in this class. It is perfectly fine for what we need to do. Let's jump into why we would use brackets versus Notepad. If you've ever used Notepad in the past, you know that it's great for just putting text in, but it doesn't give you a good understanding about how things are interacting, how things are tagged, what things are grouped, etc. So it's just black and white. Instead, we're going to be using brackets. Now this, in a very simple comparison, allows you to see the tags, the attributes, the values, and don't worry, we'll cover those in just a minute, but it's easier to see how things work out. And with the addition of extensions, you can make brackets work for you rather than you work for it. First things first, we have, of course, the file listing on the left-hand side. This also works for folders and projects. Whereas Notepad, you just have one file open at a time. With brackets, you have the capability to look at your whole project and folder at a glance and edit those in multiple instances. Next, we have, of course, coloring for tags. We'll cover what tags are in just a minute. But you can see exactly what is a tag and what is text, what is a value, what is an attribute, etc. Next, we have line numbers. If you've ever done any coding in the past, you know that line numbers are your friend. If you have an issue on line 35, you know exactly where line 35 is instead of in Notepad where you have to physically count out each line to find out where line 35 is. And of course, we have the extensions like I mentioned before. In this case, we have spell checker. In this case, the example is saying that pomodoro is not a correct word because it is an Italian word, but Notepad does not do that. What about Microsoft Word? People use Microsoft Word all the time for other things. Well, you can develop websites in Word, but the problem is for something very simple, just like this, as in a simple hello world, it's going to give you a bunch of extra code. In this case, 1,135 lines of extra code that you don't need, and chances are you don't have time to go through and debug. So for a very simple hello world page, it creates all this extra stuff that chances are you have no idea what it means, and it's just going to overload the bandwidth and other computers from trying to load something simple. So again, we are not using a visual editor or a WYSIWYG editor for this class. Let's jump into planning. When you're planning out a website, whether it's one that's new or one that you're revising, you want to make sure you know where you're going and what you want on it, essentially starting with a wish list. What you want on the site, nothing specific, just a general list of items that you want to have, maybe a few sections, nothing too fancy. Essentially, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. That's a phrase I like to use quite a lot, but in this case it does hold true because if you don't know where you're going with the site, you don't know what to do. You also want to figure out the size and structure of the pages and the content that you'll be putting on your site. If anything, you're going to know exactly how many pages you need and what kind of content will go on those pages so you know what to fetch and what to research. For example, on the right-hand side, just an artist website as an example, we want a slideshow, we want an artist statement, we want a gallery with recent and past work, a biography, a list of exhibits, an online shop, an FAQ, and a contact page. Will this change? Most definitely, but this at least gives us a better idea about where we're going and how to plan things for what items we need to get. When you're organizing a site, I know I touched briefly on this before, but in this case I want to go into it a little more depth. On the left, we have a very bad directory. You have everything dumped in one folder, and it's hard to organize, hard to find, and hard to see exactly what you have and what you don't have. Instead, something on the right is a little better. You can see that the folders and the items are separated into their own folders. So, first things first, you have the root folder. We talked about that before. The root folder is obviously where everything's going to be located for this website. In this case, it is HTTP docs under the primary domain. Next, we have subfolders. These subfolders will also be the items that will be loaded for the website. Of course, you have the index page for the primary root folder. Then you have the subfolders inside of that. The other subfolders are just storage capabilities at this point. And in this case, you have audio, you have CSS, you have images, and you have JavaScript. Any items we have relating to those folders will go into those folders, making it easier to organize. That's it for this section. The next section will be covering HTML elements. As always, if you have questions, please let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.